On December 21, 1944, during the Ardennes campaign, Field Surgeon Lieutenant Michael Donovan was recorded as leaving the front line to reach a group of wounded soldiers abandoned at the forest's edge. Time noted in the log: 14:15. By 15 o'clock, Donovan and 2 accompanying nurses lost radio contact, with no distress signal or reports of combat with German forces in the area. A search report was filed within 24 hours, yielding no trace, and the official record was closed with the conclusion, "Missing in action." His family received a telegram notification and held a funeral in early 1945 with an empty coffin. Donovan's file saw no further updates, except for a brief entry in the casualty list of the First Army. In May 2014, during construction work in Luxembourg, workers discovered a sealed underground bunker covered by an old concrete layer. Upon opening it, the site revealed only a tattered Red Cross medical bag, its leather strap stained with dried blood. Inside was a dog tag clearly engraved, "Lieutenant Michael J. Donovan, U.S. Army," some rusted medical tools, and 3 torn medical papers. Handwritten pencil notes on them sporadically listed unit numbers and wounded evacuation codes, with many sections erased or faded. The U.S. Military Archives verified the artifacts matched Donovan's 1944 file. The items were handed over to his family. The recipient was Sarah Donovan, his granddaughter, a war correspondent, who personally collected the medical bag, dog tag, and papers in Brussels. The case, once considered closed in 1944, now presented physical evidence contradicting the initial MIA report, raising questions about the true reason for Donovan's disappearance and why his personal items were sealed in an unmapped military bunker. A week after receiving her grandfather's medical bag, Sarah Donovan visited the U.S. Military Archives Center in Brussels. Her first goal was to cross-reference all records related to the disappearance on December 21, 1944. In the Ardennes records room, she was given a thin file with just a few pages. The official report on Michael Donovan consisted of a single typed page, dated December 22, 1944, signed by the medical company's commanding officer. It stated, "Lieutenant Donovan left his position under orders to reach wounded soldiers at coordinates XY 492. After 45 minutes, no contact, no sign of return. Search conducted that day yielded no results. Conclusion: missing in action. Presumed dead." The report included no site map, no direct witnesses, and no detailed search log. At the bottom was only an abbreviated signature, with no superior's confirmation. Sarah requested a review of all wounded soldiers' records from that day for cross-referencing. The archivist provided a catalog of wounded personnel logged in the system. However, all medical records, from December 20 to 23, 1944, were missing. The files were marked "Withdrawn 1946", with no reason for withdrawal or backups. When checked on microfilm, a 3-day gap existed. This disappearance couldn't be coincidental, as records before and after this period were complete. Sarah noted a suspicious correlation: the timing of Donovan's disappearance coincided with the erasure of all wounded soldiers' records from that day. The only surviving report didn't list the wounded Donovan was sent to rescue, only noting briefly casualties unknown. This suggested the case was hastily and deliberately closed. Continuing to examine the evidence, Sarah had the military forensics lab re-inspect the medical bag. On the leather strap, besides dried blood, there was a small time-worn carving. Under a magnifying glass, it clearly showed the letter R, neatly etched, not a random scratch. The technician noted the mark could have been made with a thin blade, likely intentional as a sign. This R appeared in no U.S. Army medical equipment guidelines from World War II. While searching further in the archives, Sarah found a handwritten note in a separate file on medical transport routes from December 1944. Supplies redirected. Crates to be secured at Bastogne sector. The note was scribbled on the page's edge, unsigned. Unusually, the crates list included a code typically used for personnel, not medical supplies. Sarah concluded the session with 3 solid pieces of information: a 1-page disappearance report, the complete absence of wounded soldiers' records for 3 days, and the R mark on the medical bag's strap. The next day, Sarah returned to the archives to request records on the officer who signed Donovan's report. The name was clear: Colonel Thomas Caldwell. In the system, Caldwell was listed as serving in the Ardennes in December 1944, but after 1946, there was no trace. No discharge papers, no death report, no pension records. His file ended with a single line, status transferred. No destination or receiving unit was noted. Sarah photographed all documents and compiled a comparison chart. Donovan's disappearance was closed within 24 hours with an empty report, accompanied by the systematic removal of wounded soldiers' records and signs of a commanding officer who later vanished from military files. The R on the medical bag was no longer just an odd detail, but the only link between the 2014 artifacts and the deliberate gaps in 1944 records. The initial picture of the case became clear. The so-called MIA status wasn't based on any field investigation, but was an administrative conclusion, signed off hastily. Key documents were removed from archives, and related personnel vanished from official records. From the Brussels documents, Sarah pinpointed the area where Donovan's reported disappearance occurred, near the edge of a small village in northern Luxembourg. Locals who survived the war still lived there. She met a 96-year-old farmer, Jean Muller, introduced as the last witness, who clearly recalled events from the winter of 1944. Jean welcomed Sarah into his old brick house, with medical records proving he had served as a civilian laborer for the Allies. When Sarah asked about December 21, 1944, he recounted, "That afternoon, I was at the forest's edge, looking for cattle, when I saw a group of American soldiers pass by. Among them was a man in a medical coat, carrying a medical bag. He wasn't armed. 2 American soldiers flanked him tightly, their hands on his shoulders." Sarah requested a detailed description. Jean emphasized it was definitely not German soldiers, as they had been pushed back from the area by then. He distinctly remembered the lead officer's voice, a drawn-out Southern American accent. The officer was tall, wore a cap instead of a helmet, and had an unusual insignia on his coat's shoulder, a black bird with spread wings. Jean insisted he'd never seen that insignia before or after on any U.S. uniform. According to Jean, the soldiers led Donovan toward a bunker near the forest's edge, previously a German storage site. After Donovan was taken inside, American soldiers immediately posted guards. For days after the battle, Jean saw Americans guarding the bunker, barring villagers from approaching. He said, "They set up barriers, guns always pointed outward. Anyone passing by was chased off." After about a week, the soldiers left, but the bunker's entrance was blocked with dirt and stones. No one could approach after that, fearing mines inside. Sarah recorded Jean's testimony and had him sign it. Notably, Jean recalled hearing Donovan speak a few urgent sentences in English, mentioning wounded and must help. Immediately after, one of the American soldiers silenced him and pushed him toward the bunker. Jean's testimony aligned with Sarah's findings: the strange mark on the medical bag, the hastily filed disappearance report, and the missing wounded soldiers' records. It suggested Donovan wasn't killed in combat, but was detained by American soldiers and taken to a secretly controlled bunker. When Sarah asked about the officer with the black bird insignia, Jean said he'd remembered it for years. After the war, he mentioned it to an American officer stationed in Luxembourg, but no one cared. "They told me I was mistaken, probably saw a German insignia, but I knew the difference. It was a U.S. insignia, sewn on the coat, a black crow. I never saw it in any unit." The bunker area Jean described matched the map coordinates of Donovan's disappearance and the site where workers found the bunker with the medical bag in 2014. This corroborated the entire account. Donovan was taken to the bunker, which was then sealed, and decades later, his medical bag was unearthed there. Sarah compiled a detailed report, collecting Jean Muller's signed testimony with photos. The witness account not only debunked the theory that Donovan was lost to German fire, but confirmed the presence of a special U.S. unit with a unique insignia, operating separately from regular forces. This piece turned the case from a simple MIA report into one involving organized concealment, with direct evidence tied to the Blackbird insignia and the command of an American officer not listed in standard rosters. From Jean Muller's testimony, Sarah shifted focus to finding other witnesses who served with U.S. medical units in the Ardennes. In a 1944 Luxembourg list of civilian medical support workers, she found Marie Hoffman, now 94, a former volunteer nurse, when the Allies entered the area. After weeks of contact, Sarah was granted a meeting at a nursing home outside Edelbruck. Marie sat upright in her chair, her memory sharp. When Sarah asked about Michael Donovan, she nodded. "I knew him. A young American, always carrying his medical bag, kind to civilians. I remember the last day I saw him, arguing fiercely with his commanding officer. According to Marie, on the morning of December 21, 1944, Donovan received word of a group of heavily wounded American soldiers after shelling near the Ardennes forest. He demanded to evacuate them, but the officer in charge, a colonel named Caldwell, ordered them left behind, citing the need to avoid risking the transport route's exposure. Donovan vehemently objected, stating publicly, "This isn't war, it's a crime." Caldwell remained cold, stressing the priority was secrecy. Marie recounted, "I was a few meters away." Donovan nearly shouted. He said outright, "Abandoning our own men is no different from the enemy." Caldwell turned away, but I saw his hand clench his glove, and his soldiers immediately closed in on Donovan. Before being escorted away, Donovan slipped a small, hastily folded note into Marie's hand. She kept it in her pocket for years, unnoticed. It read, in scribbled pencil, "This one is dangerous." Marie explained, "I didn't fully understand, but later realized he meant the real threat was from his own side." Sarah asked to see the note. The elderly woman opened an old tin box, revealing the yellowed paper, faded but legible. This was the first direct evidence from Donovan, confirming he wasn't lost in combat but targeted by allies. Marie had more. She said that afternoon, after Donovan was taken, she secretly followed to near the restricted bunker area. When Donovan was led inside, she found a metal badge on the ground. It was circular, with a black crow spreading its wings, edged with faint numbers. Marie kept it private, fearing trouble if she turned it in. Sarah examined it. The badge matched no official U.S. Army unit from the war. It suggested a covert group, possibly a code name or special force. Combined with the R on the medical bag's strap, the picture clarified a hidden U.S. unit was involved in Donovan's disappearance. In the interview record, Marie confirmed Caldwell was the tall Southern-voiced officer Gene Muller described. Thus, two independent witnesses, a villager and a nurse, identified the same officer and event. Donovan was detained, not killed by German fire. Sarah compared this to the one-page disappearance report. It omitted Caldwell, the order to abandon wounded soldiers, and Donovan's argument before leaving. It was reduced to missing while rescuing wounded. This discrepancy showed the record was deliberately minimized and distorted from the start. At the interview's end, Sarah photographed the note and badge, storing them as evidence. The items from an elderly nurse proved Donovan left a warning, and the threat came not from Germans, but from an American officer with a crow insignia. Marie Hoffman's account reinforced Gene Muller's and added physical evidence tied to Donovan and Caldwell. The investigation now had solid grounds. Lieutenant Michael Donovan vanished for opposing orders to abandon wounded soldiers and was detained by allies to silence him. Sarah left the nursing home with two new pieces of evidence, the handwritten note and the crow badge. From a flimsy MIA report, the case expanded into a chain of systematic concealment. The enemy wasn't across the front line, but within the ranks. Days later, Sarah returned to the Brussels military archives to dig deeper into remaining 1944 winter records. She focused on Medical Corps and Medical Transport Unit files, where traces of Donovan's involvement might linger. In a dusty archive box, Sarah found a faded set of operational maps marking transport routes for December 1944. Most routes were annotated with medical supply codes. However, one map stood out with an unusual marking, a secondary route through the Ardennes forest, exactly where Donovan vanished, labeled in red ink, medical crates. Sarah knew crates typically meant cargo, but in the wartime Medical Corps, it wasn't a standard term for medicine or tools. Records usually specified bandages, morphine or supplies. Calling them medical crates suggested obfuscation or coding. The anomaly didn't end there. On the map's edge, a faint pencil note read, "Doctor's relocation secured." It was unsigned, unmarked, like an internal memo. Combined with Donovan's dispute over abandoning wounded soldiers, this note raised suspicions. Instead of prioritizing the wounded, the transport route was used to move doctors, noted as relocation secured. Sarah cross-checked further. The map was part of a larger file, labeled Medical Transport 1944, 1945. But flipping to the next section, she noticed pages torn out. The tears weren't from age but deliberate, with binding threads still showing intentional removal. A final handwritten label read, "Removed 1946." When Sarah asked the archivist, she learned removed meant files were recalled to Washington or destroyed under internal orders. The log offered no explanation for the removals, and no microfilm copies existed, as was standard. Whatever was taken in 1946 was gone entirely. Sarah photographed the map and note meticulously. This was the first documentary evidence proving the Ardennes transport route wasn't for rescuing wounded, but for moving doctors. Combined with witness accounts and Donovan's artifacts, it suggested his disappearance tied directly to a covert mission, protecting the transfer of German doctors during the battle's peak. Digging deeper, Sarah found a December 1944 logistics inventory. It detailed medical truck shipments of supplies with crate counts. Most had valid codes, but for December 21st, the day Donovan vanished, one entry stood out: Crate 7, Bastogne route, priority. No cargo description, no wounded count, just a brief line. The more Sarah searched, the clearer the systematic erasure became. All wounded soldiers' records from December 20th, 23 were missing, as she'd noted earlier. Now detailed medical transport maps were also removed in 1946, all tied to the same day, area and disappearance. This new evidence confirmed Donovan was erased from records and pointed to a parallel secret operation during the Ardennes campaign. The medical crates transports weren't for medicine or wounded, but for doctors, targets to be moved safely, even at the cost of abandoning American wounded. Sarah saved the map, noting the transport route through the Ardennes, exactly where the Luxembourg witness saw Donovan taken to the bunker. The pieces fit. An American field surgeon discovered an irrational order, protested, left a warning note, and was detained by soldiers under a Crow insignia officer. What Donovan saw threatened a secret the U.S. military hid, one big enough to erase all records by 1946. With this document, Sarah held a critical link. The medical crates transport was why Donovan had to disappear. After securing the medical crates map, and the doctor's relocation secured, note from the Brussels archives, Sarah sought indirect witnesses, soldiers present in the Ardennes, who survived the battle. She reviewed a list of U.S. wounded evacuated in late December 1944. Few families retained records. One name stood out: Private First Class Henry Miller, 333rd Infantry Battalion, wounded in Bastogne, on December 21st, and evacuated. Sarah tracked down his son Richard Miller, now in his 70s, living outside Liège. When Sarah explained her purpose, Richard wasn't surprised. He said his father, before passing, often spoke of an American field surgeon named Donovan, who saved him from bleeding out in a blizzard. In a small living room, Richard opened an old wooden chest, pulling out his father's tattered soldier's notebook, and a letter rewritten from memory years later. The unsent letter, kept as a personal record, detailed Henry Miller's account. On December 21, 1944, I was wounded in the leg by shrapnel near Foy Forest. As I was bleeding out, an American medic appeared. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Donovan, quickly bandaged me, and pulled me to a makeshift shelter. Before I could recover, another group of American soldiers arrived. I thought they were there to help, but instead they surrounded Donovan. The tall commander, with a southern accent, said Donovan had to come with them immediately. I heard Donovan protest, "I still have wounded here." They didn't let him say more. They dragged him off in the snow. Later another medical team took me to a transfer station. No one mentioned Donovan again. Richard handed Sarah the letter. The shaky handwriting was clear and matched prior witness accounts. Donovan was taken by American soldiers, not Germans. Sarah checked the chest and found a small envelope with papers. Richard said his father kept secret. Among them was a yellowed typed page, like an excerpt from an operational report. At the bottom was an abbreviated signature: Colonel T. Caldwell. Sarah froze. This was the first specific name tied to the entire case. Until now, clues pointed to a Southern-voiced officer with a Crow insignia and mysterious authority. Now an old document confirmed: Colonel Caldwell. When Sarah asked about its origin, Richard explained, "My father said a nurse hid this paper in his coat while he recovered in a field hospital. The nurse warned him never to show it to superiors, as it would cause trouble. He kept it his whole life, but never explained fully. He only instructed us, if anyone mentions Donovan, show them this paper." Sarah examined it closely. The torn-edged page had a faint line: "Sector secured. All medical assets transferred. Authorization: Colonel T. Caldwell. This matched the Brussels map's medical crates and doctors' relocation secured. Note. Thus Donovan wasn't just someone who opposed abandoning wounded soldiers. He witnessed and knew of a covert operation hidden under medical transport. The person who signed the order, with authorization, was Caldwell. Richard sighed. My father died in 1999. He went to his grave haunted that he survived, thanks to Donovan, but could do nothing when Donovan was taken before his eyes. He always called it a debt he could never repay. Sarah carefully photographed the documents and recorded the account. With Caldwell's signed paper, the case's picture sharpened. The Crow insignia officer was no longer a vague description. He had a name, a signature, and direct responsibility for moving medical assets and Donovan's disappearance. What struck Sarah most was Henry Miller's description. Donovan saved a wounded soldier just before being taken. His disappearance wasn't random chaos of battle. It was selective, commanded, and happened right after Donovan defied orders to abandon the wounded. When leaving Richard Miller's house, Sarah knew she had crucial evidence, an indirect witness confirming Donovan was taken by American soldiers, and a document signed by Caldwell directly tied to the case. What were previously scattered pieces? The accounts of the Luxembourg farmer, Nurse Marie, the transport map, now connected into a coherent chain. Donovan had known the secret about moving doctors through the Ardennes. He opposed abandoning wounded soldiers to protect the operation, and just hours later, he was ordered detained by Colonel Caldwell. The mystery now had a face and a specific name, and Sarah understood this name would lead her to another layer of records, where the real reason why Donovan had to disappear might be revealed. From the paper signed Colonel T. Caldwell. Among Private Henry Miller's belongings, Sarah began tracing this officer's official trail. She accessed the Brussels military archives and requested a search of the roster of American officers who fought in the Ardennes. The list spanned hundreds of names, many promoted after the war, some killed in action, others discharged normally. But Caldwell's name appeared on no official roster of any corps. Sarah expanded her search to U.S. Army personnel records from 1944, 1945. Here too, no Thomas Caldwell appeared among officers managing medical or logistics units in the Ardennes. It was as if the name had never existed in the regular system. This deepened her suspicion, as she held a document with Colonel T. Caldwell's signature and witness accounts of a tall officer with a southern accent, wearing a raven insignia. She dug into intelligence records, which were often stored separately. In the Intelligence Operations, European Theater 1944-1945 section, Sarah stumbled upon a partially declassified report from 1978. Dated March 1945, it was drafted by U.S. Intelligence Command. One line made her pause. Colonel Thomas Caldwell, designation, Raven, authorized to oversee relocation and protection of sensitive medical assets in Ardennes sector. Sarah froze. For the first time, Caldwell's name appeared in an official record, paired with the code name Raven. This was the blackbird insignia witnesses had mentioned. The pieces fit. Caldwell was Raven, a senior intelligence officer, tasked with controlling a special operation in the Ardennes. The report didn't detail what medical assets were, but Donovan's disappearance after opposing the abandonment of wounded soldiers, coinciding with the medical crates transport route, showed a direct link. Caldwell Raven was responsible for eliminating threats to the operation's secrecy. Sarah traced post-war records. By protocol, colonels would have discharge papers, pension records, or death reports. But after 1946, no documents mentioned Caldwell. In the U.S. Department of Defense's retired officers list, Caldwell was absent. No record in the deceased lists, nor in missing records. By 1947, when the U.S. Army published the official list of officers who served in Europe, Caldwell had been completely erased, as if he never existed. A figure with authority to sign orders for secret medical transports in the Ardennes had vanished from all archives. Sarah cross-checked with post-war investigation records. In 1946, a Pentagon archive memo referenced a review of unofficial intelligence activities in Europe. Among the scrutinized was Raven, status unresolved. This was the last mention of Raven in declassified documents. After that, nothing. From witnesses to written evidence, Sarah pieced together a picture. In December 1944, Caldwell, codenamed Raven, directed the operation to relocate medical assets from the Ardennes. Donovan discovered it, objected, and was ordered detained by Raven. In 1945, Raven was still noted in intelligence reports, but from 1946, Caldwell vanished completely. No discharge papers, no death report, no pension. This meant Caldwell wasn't an ordinary officer. He belonged to a covert intelligence network, powerful enough to erase itself from military records. Sarah copied all documents, photographing the 1945 report, with the line Colonel Thomas Caldwell, designation, Raven. This was the first evidence confirming Raven wasn't a fabricated alias, but an official code name used in U.S. intelligence. Leaving the archive, Sarah realized a chilling detail. All records tied to Raven were removed from the system after 1946, coinciding with the torn pages of the medical crates map. Donovan's label as missing in action was just one link in a comprehensive cover-up plan, and Caldwell Raven was the central link, orchestrating it all. The records didn't reveal where Caldwell went after 1946. No one knew if he lived or died, but from the way his name was erased, Sarah understood Raven hadn't vanished. He had retreated into the shadows, where a covert network from the war operated secrets that even decades of declassified documents avoided. With Caldwell, Donovan's mystery was no longer just about a doctor lost in a snowstorm. It was a link in a systematically concealed conspiracy spanning decades. And now Sarah had touched the heart of that darkness. Raven. After confirming Caldwell was Raven and vanished from records in 1946, Sarah sought living witnesses who could directly confirm details around Donovan. In a list of U.S. Army medics who served in the Ardennes, she found a name: Edward Eddie Harris, a former field medic with the 101st Regiment, now living in a Virginia nursing home. At 94, frail but sharp, when Sarah arrived, the manager had prepared Harris. He sat in a wheelchair, hands trembling but eyes clear. When Sarah mentioned Donovan, he nodded instantly. "I remember, young lady," he said in a hoarse voice. "Michael Donovan, medical lieutenant, the man who spoke up when we all stayed silent." Sarah recorded him. Harris recounted that during the Ardennes' most intense days, Donovan repeatedly opposed orders to abandon wounded soldiers for faster retreats. He said, "We swore to save lives, not choose who lives or dies." "I remember Donovan threatening to report to high command if the orders continued." Harris paused, sipped water, and continued. "That morning, December 21st, Donovan was set to write a report. I saw him with a notebook, logging details, locations, times, numbers of wounded left behind. He said he'd send it through official medical channels, but that afternoon, Donovan was gone." Sarah pressed for details. Harris closed his eyes, recalling, "We were cleaning a temporary aid station. A convoy of trucks arrived, all with red crosses. I thought they were medical transports from the rear, so I helped unload. But a strange officer stepped out, tall Southern accent. I noticed a blackbird insignia on his coat. He called Donovan out." Per Harris, Donovan didn't resist. He only asked, "Where are you taking me?" The officer didn't answer, just gestured. Soldiers flanked Donovan, forcing him into a truck's cargo hold. "What haunts me is that truck had no wounded. It was empty. Just Donovan was taken." Sarah cross-checked. The blackbird insignia, Southern accent, and Donovan's removal in a medical truck matched the Luxembourg witness and Henry Miller's accounts perfectly. Harris recalled one more detail. "A soldier in my unit whispered the officer was Colonel Caldwell. He was notorious in intelligence units, but no one wanted to talk about him. He appeared and vanished like a ghost. That was the only time I saw him in person. After Donovan was taken, no one in the unit dared mention him." The next day, the official report listed Donovan as MIA, missing in action. Harris said, "We knew it was a lie, but everyone was scared. They made it clear, anyone tied to Donovan's case would face anti-war investigations or even be labeled as collaborating with the enemy. So we all stayed quiet." Sarah noted every word. This was her first direct witness, a teammate who saw Donovan taken by a medical truck. This evidence aligned with her findings: the medical crates map, Caldwell's signature, the Raven codename. Harris ended with a chilling remark: Donovan didn't die from German bullets, he was erased for wanting to report the truth. We all knew, but none of us had the courage to speak. I've waited 70 years for someone to ask. Leaving the nursing home, Sarah knew she had another critical link, a direct witness to Donovan's removal. The scattered clues now formed a continuous thread, from the medical crates map to Caldwell Raven, and now the medical truck, all pointed to one conclusion: Donovan was eliminated by U.S. forces to protect a secret in the Ardennes forest. Edward Harris's testimony made Sarah more certain than ever. Donovan didn't vanish in battlefield chaos. He was taken by a medical truck on Caldwell's orders, codenamed Raven. But to expose Caldwell's role, she needed more than testimony. Sarah began tracing financial and classified post-war records. In Stockholm, where Swedish banks that worked with the Allies after 1945 stored records, Sarah applied for access as an international journalist. After weeks, she gained limited access to historical data. An elderly bank employee handed her a file marked CUN number 4451, 1945. The account holder, Thomas Caldwell. The account opened on May 17, 1945. Days after Nazi Germany's surrender, the initial deposit was substantial, far exceeding a medical colonel's salary. From 1946, 1948, irregular large sums were deposited, sourced from private transfers, Zurich and Bern. The file showed the account was never closed. Sporadic transactions continued for decades, the last in August 2009. Sarah was stunned. If Caldwell vanished from military records in 1946, how was his account active for over 6 decades? Either Caldwell lived far longer, or someone was authorized to maintain it for him. This proved Raven's network didn't end after the war, but persisted in the shadows. Digging deeper, Sarah found a small file tucked inside, a copy of a 1946 internal telegram. It read, "Funds allocated for relocation project. Raven confirms receipt." This was evidence Caldwell was directly tied to a relocation project post-war, likely the transfer of German doctors Donovan had witnessed. Sarah brought the documents to Brussels, cross-referencing with photos from the Luxembourg Military History Museum's archives. In a late 1944 Ardennes battlefield collection, one blurry but clear photo showed a group of American officers beside 2 German officers in uniform, unbound and unescorted. A tall, broad-shouldered American stood in the center, a faint black bird visible on his coat. Caption: Ardennes, the 28th of December 1944, unofficial medical representatives meeting. Sarah zoomed in, comparing it to Caldwell's profile in a 1945 intelligence report. The face was unmistakably similar. Caldwell, Raven, was at a meeting with German officers in the Ardennes, precisely when Donovan vanished. Not as prisoners, not for interrogation, but a covert meeting. This explained everything. Caldwell didn't just oversee medical crates transport. He directly negotiated with Germans about moving doctors and medical data. Donovan saw signs of this compromise and demanded to report it. The next day, he was taken. Sarah saved the photocopy, marking Caldwell's face, along with the Swedish bank records. The evidence chain grew clearer. Caldwell, codenamed Raven, directed secret transports. He vanished from official records after 1946, but his Stockholm account remained active until 2009. The Ardennes photo showed Caldwell meeting German officers, proving collaboration beyond combat. With this evidence, Sarah realized Donovan paid with his life for opposing and documenting what he saw. Each investigation step darkened the picture. Raven and his network weren't just about one disappearance in a snowy forest, but a decades-long covert collaboration system. The biggest question lingered: if Caldwell's account was active until 2009, who withdrew the money? Was Raven still alive in the shadows, or had someone inherited his role to keep the secret hidden? The Stockholm bank records, and the Ardennes photo of Caldwell with German officers, led Sarah to a new investigation path, finding concrete evidence of the transports Donovan had uncovered. She followed a lead to a private archive in Brussels, owned by a family that provided logistics for the Allies late in the war. The current manager, Mr. WW2, reluctantly allowed her to review old documents, on condition of source anonymity. The archive, in a damp basement, was filled with sealed wooden boxes and metal crates from the 1940s. WW2 led Sarah to an iron shelf labeled, "Transport, Medical 1944, After hours of searching, she found a file wrapped in oilcloth, stamped faintly with the U.S. Army Medical Corps seal. Inside were not just lists of medical supplies but medical personnel transfer lists, records of medical personnel movements. Sarah scanned them, heart pounding. The name column listed clear German names: Dr. Heinrich Voss, Dr. Albert Kramer, Dr. Otto Weiss, all marked nationality, German. Under notes, instead of POW, prisoner of war, it read asset, secured. A detailed log outlined the route. Red cross-marked trucks left Bastogne, passed through the Ardennes corridor, then joined U.S. logistics routes. A handwritten note in the margin read, relocation, Luxembourg staging. This matched the medical crates map Sarah found in the Brussels archive. Cross-referencing the list, Sarah froze. One name stood out: Dr. Heinrich Voss, previously stationed Dachau, immunology research. Dachau, the concentration camp where thousands of prisoners were used as subjects for medical experiments. The fact that a doctor who once worked there appeared on a medical personnel transport list under American military protection proves what Donovan had realized. American officers, led by Caldwell, were evacuating and protecting German doctors instead of prosecuting them. Sarah flipped through the other pages. There was a form dated December 22, 1944, just one day after Donovan disappeared. The typed text read, all designated personnel successfully relocated. Further transit to Antwerp, scheduled. At the bottom, a confirming signature, Raven. She immediately photographed everything, meticulously noting every detail. This was direct evidence. Caldwell, under the code name Raven, was not only present but also signed off on the transfer of German doctors, including those directly linked to Dachau. WW2, the warehouse manager, seemed anxious as Sarah finished her work. He said his father had been a logistics driver for the American military in late 1944. Once he drove a convoy of medical trucks through the Luxembourg forest. When he opened the cargo, he saw no medical supplies, only men in white coats, heavily guarded by American soldiers. His father recounted that they were not treated like prisoners, but like VIPs being escorted. Sarah realized this matched perfectly with the evidence Donovan had intended to report. If he had documented the details in his notebook, that was why Raven eliminated him. The file also included an appendix, confidential memo, January 1945. The faded text was still legible. Relocation of priority personnel completed. Further integration into U.S. facilities approved. Security threat. Exposure risk from medical staff within 101st Unit. One officer, Donovan, already neutralized. Recommend continued monitoring of associated personnel. The final sentence chilled Sarah. One officer, Donovan, already neutralized. Thus Donovan's disappearance was explicitly recorded as a step in the cover-up plan. When Sarah asked WW2 why these records still existed, he explained, "My father kept some because he feared being implicated in crimes. After the war, there was an order to retrieve them, but some copies were overlooked. My family hid them for decades." Sarah thanked him and left the private archive with fully copied documents. This was the strongest evidence yet. Donovan disappeared because he dared to obstruct the evacuation of German doctors who should have faced war crime trials, but were instead protected and secretly transported to American territory. Caldwell was the one who signed and executed it. The pieces now formed a clear line. The map of medical crates marked the route. Handwritten note, doctors' relocation secured. A witness confirming Donovan was taken away on a medical truck. Caldwell's bank account in Sweden. And now the list of evacuated German doctors, including one who served at Dachau, with Raven's signature. Sarah knew this was no longer just a personal disappearance. It was a dark chapter of history. In the midst of the Ardennes, as thousands of American soldiers died in the snow, an intelligence network exploited the chaos to extract German doctors who had committed crimes, and Donovan paid the price for trying to report the truth. She organized the documents, preparing for the next step, verifying the identities of the doctors on the list. If one from Dachau had been evacuated, there were surely others, and more secrets hidden in the deliberately shredded files. With the secret medical transport list and Raven's signature in hand, Sarah decided to head to Sweden, where Caldwell had opened a bank account in 1945. She hoped to find additional witness traces to confirm what Donovan had experienced. A contact from a European journalism colleague led her to a nursing home on the outskirts of Stockholm, where a former American soldier who settled there after World War II resided. His relative introduced him, Samuel Porter, 95, a former logistics soldier of the 4th Infantry Division. Despite his age, He was sharp and had a remarkable memory. When Sarah mentioned Donovan's name, his eyes lit up, then he fell silent for a long while. I didn't think anyone would ask about that after all these years, Porter said slowly. Sarah turned on her recorder, explaining the documents she had found, the medical crates map, the list of German doctors, and Caldwell's signature. Porter nodded and began to recount. That day we were stationed near the Luxembourg forest, freezing cold. I was in charge of coordinating transport trucks, mostly carrying food and wounded soldiers. On the afternoon of December 21st, a convoy of trucks with red crosses appeared. Unlike usual, this time they were accompanied by armed soldiers and a tall officer in charge. On his coat was a black insignia, shaped like a bird. Sarah prompted, "A raven." Porter nodded firmly. "Yes, a raven. Back then I didn't understand its meaning, just thought it was odd. Not an official military insignia." According to Porter, Donovan appeared when the convoy stopped. He ran out from a first aid station, hands still stained with the blood of the wounded. He shouted at the commanding officer, "You can't leave them behind, there are dozens still alive in the forest." That scene stuck with Porter forever. Donovan wouldn't stay quiet, Porter said. He kept repeating, "I'll report this to the higher-ups. This is a crime, abandoning the wounded." The soldiers escorting looked at each other, then the officer signaled. Immediately, 2 soldiers rushed forward, restrained Donovan, and dragged him onto the truck. He kept shouting, still talking about the abandoned wounded, until the truck door slammed shut. Sarah asked, "Did anyone in your unit react?" Porter shook his head. "No one dared. That officer was too powerful. I heard soldiers around me whisper that he was Caldwell, someone in intelligence. But back then, when a high-ranking officer gave an order, no one dared speak up. Everyone pretended not to see." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "What stuck with me was that after Donovan was taken, that convoy wasn't carrying any wounded. Instead there were men in white coats, looking like doctors, being escorted like valuables. When the convoy left, we knew those so-called medical trucks weren't for the wounded." Sarah showed him a photo of Caldwell standing next to a German officer in the Ardennes. Porter stared for a long time, then exclaimed, "That's him. I recognize the broad shoulders, the stance, no mistake." To be certain, Sarah showed him a copy of the transport list she found in the Brussels private archive. When he read the name, Dr. Heinrich Voss, Dachau, Porter paled. "I remember hearing it. While the escort soldiers talked, I overheard them mention Voss's and experiments. I didn't understand then, but now it's clear." Porter's testimony not only matched Sarah's collected records, but added vivid details. Donovan was seized the moment he shouted in protest of abandoning the wounded, and Caldwell, wearing a raven insignia, was the one in charge. Those being escorted weren't injured American soldiers, but German doctors, one of them linked to Dachau. Before leaving the nursing home, Porter held Sarah's hand. "I stayed silent my whole life. I know I was a coward, but back then everyone was scared. If you bring this truth to light, Donovan will finally be vindicated. He was the only one who dared say what we all thought but couldn't voice." Sarah stepped outside, the cold Stockholm wind hitting her face, but Porter's words made it clear. Donovan wasn't just eliminated for knowing the secret of the German doctor's evacuation. He was seized on the spot, while doing his duty to save the wounded, and disappeared on a convoy of fake medical trucks. The evidence and witnesses had now converged. Donovan, Caldwell, Raven, the doctors from Dachau. The story was no longer a solitary disappearance, but a link in a covert network between America and Germany, in the midst of war, a network Donovan paid for with his life. After leaving Stockholm following her meeting with veteran Samuel Porter, Sarah believed she had pieced together a clear picture of Donovan, Caldwell, and the Raven network. But the more evidence she held, the more she sensed a shadow closing in. Back in Brussels, Sarah noticed strange signs immediately. A gray car was parked outside her hotel all evening. When she switched rooms and moved to another guest house, the car reappeared at the street corner. The next morning, her room's door was ajar, her suitcase rummaged through, but no valuables were missing. Only the Donovan files were disturbed. Someone wasn't after theft, they wanted to know what she had. Sarah immediately called Porter to warn him. His frail voice on the line said curtly, "I knew they'd come for you sooner or later. Leave Brussels now. I have an old friend in the Luxembourg resistance, who still keeps something Donovan left behind, but first you need to be safe." That afternoon, when Sarah returned to her rented apartment to gather documents, she found the doors locked tampered with. Inside, the floor was a mess, every drawer opened, Fortunately, she carried the critical document copies with her, but the signs were clear. The stalker was no longer discreet. That night, Porter sent another veteran, James Walker, to help Sarah. He was a wartime transport driver now living reclusively in Sweden. Walker led Sarah to the train station in the dark, avoiding all surveillance cameras. "We'll go through Hamburg, then to Malmö," he whispered. "From there to Stockholm, you need to disappear from their sight." The journey was tense. On the train to Germany, Sarah noticed two men in the back seats constantly watching. Walker pulled her into the dining car, then abruptly switched trains at Bremen. "They'll think we're continuing to Hamburg," he explained. 3 days later, they reached Sweden safely. Walker arranged for Sarah to stay in a wooden cabin on the outskirts of Gothenburg. "Girl," he said, "what you're carrying isn't just historical evidence, it touches a network that still exists. Caldwell may be dead or gone, but Raven was never just one man. You need to understand that." At the cabin, Walker handed Sarah a dark cloth bundle. "Porter gave this to me in 1946. He got it from a Luxembourg resistance contact. They said clearly, this was Donovan's." Sarah opened the bundle, revealing a small, worn leather notebook with MD etched faintly. The yellowed pages were still legible. On the first page, Donovan had written by hand, "To those who still believe justice didn't die in the snow. If I don't return, use what's here to prove the truth." She flipped through the pages quickly. The content detailed the days before his disappearance, lists of abandoned wounded, numbers of German doctors appearing in the American camp, and a description of an officer, codenamed Raven. One passage took Sarah's breath away. December 20th, 1944. "Caldwell ordered all wounded removed from the supply line. But I saw with my own eyes, instead of medical supply trucks, they carried German doctors, some from Dachau. I plan to write a report. If I disappear tomorrow, know why." Walker said softly. "Porter said Donovan sent this notebook to a Luxembourg resistance group, asking them to keep it. After the war, they passed it to Porter to take to America. But Porter was too scared. He kept it hidden his whole life. Now he wants you to have it." Sarah turned to the final page, where a single scrawled line read, "The enemy beside you is more dangerous than the one in front." This was the exact phrase a Luxembourg nurse had mentioned. The notebook confirmed all prior accounts. That evening, as Sarah prepared to rest, Walker warned, "You've been marked. They'll keep looking, not just in Brussels but across Europe. But now you have something they can't deny. Donovan's handwritten notes, detailing every step, every day. This is living proof." Sarah knew she couldn't return to Brussels yet, but with Donovan's notebook, Caldwell's photo, the transport list, and witness testimonies, she had a solid chain of evidence. Only one question remained: how to bring it all to light, without being silenced by Raven, or those who succeeded him. In the quiet Swedish forest night, Sarah sat under an oil lamp, reading Donovan's lines. Amid the fragmented notes, a full picture emerged. A covert network sacrificed American wounded to shield German doctors who committed crimes, and the honesty of one battlefield doctor, Michael Donovan, cost him his life. In the Gothenburg cabin, Sarah opened the cloth bundle Walker gave her. Inside was a black leather notebook, faintly etched with MD. The cover was worn, the page edges stained with damp. The first pages weren't a personal diary, but a detailed battlefield log, with clear dates. December 18, 1944. Bastogne First Aid Station overwhelmed. Caldwell appeared, ordered those who couldn't move to be left behind. Soldiers obeyed silently. I protested. Caldwell said no priority for those staying. Priority is cargo. December 19, 1944. 12 wounded left in the snow. Red Cross convoy passed but carried no wounded. Through the tarp, I saw white coat silhouettes. German doctors, identified Heinrich Voss, formerly at Dachau. No mistake. December 20, 1944. Compiled list of abandoned wounded, with conditions. Noted names of escorted German doctors. Caldwell knows. Called me aside. He warned, "You're going too far." I asked, "Why do American soldiers die in the forest while Germans are protected?" He only said, "Strategy." The writing grew hurried, the pen pressed hard, ink bleeding through to the opposite page. December 21, 1944. Morning treating wounded at Forest Edge. Heard new convoy arriving. Prepared report copy. Hid it in medical bandages. December 21, 1944. Afternoon. Medical trucks arrived. Cargo empty. Caldwell leading, coat with Raven insignia. I shouted, "We can't abandon our wounded to protect them." Caldwell didn't respond, just signaled. Soldiers rushed me, restrained me, dragged me onto the truck. Saw more men in white coats being escorted. Right below, Donovan wrote a bold underlined line. If I disappear, know this: they protect Germans, not our own soldiers. The final pages had only fragmented sentences. Prepared report. Caldwell oversees every step. Sound of trucks approaching. I'll send this notebook to Luxembourg resistance. The writing stopped abruptly. I hear footsteps. The ink stretched into a horizontal streak across the page, blending with a dark brown stain. The edge of the paper bore traces of dried blood. The diary revealed the entire affair. Donovan personally witnessed Caldwell ordering the abandonment of wounded soldiers, saw empty medical convoys transporting German doctors, identified one from Dachau, and recorded it all with dates. He was captured while still writing. The dried blood on the final page was undeniable proof. The accounts of the Luxembourg witness, Nurse Marie, Henry Miller, and veteran Porter were now confirmed by Donovan's own handwritten document. Its contents fully matched the medical crates map, the transport lists, and Caldwell's signature. The notebook was not just a record, it was an indictment. It proved Donovan wasn't missing in action, as military records claimed, but was eliminated to cover up a German doctor evacuation operation in the Ardennes, under the direct orders of Colonel Thomas Caldwell, codename Raven. Donovan's diary, with its blood-stained final page, became irrefutable evidence. But to connect it to a larger network, Sarah needed to prove Caldwell didn't just operate in the Ardennes, but was protected after the war. She filed a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request in the U.S., focusing on CIA records from the late 1940s. After weeks, Sarah received a thick set of documents, many pages redacted, but still revealing key details. The title: Medical Network, European Theater, 1948. The first page listed the names of operational officers, prominently among them, Colonel Thomas Caldwell, Raven. The documents confirmed Caldwell didn't vanish after 1946, but continued operating under an intelligence cover. The report's contents revealed the CIA maintained a secret program called Medical Network, aimed at collecting and exchanging medical research from German sources. Several sections highlighted the utility of data from Dachau and other concentration camps. A document dated April 12, 1948, signed by Caldwell, stated personnel resources safely relocated from the Ardennes in late 1944 are now stabilized. Reported to Washington, progress in immunity and hypothermia research. Request additional resources to protect witnesses and maintain cooperative channels. A handwritten note in the margin by a CIA official read, confirmed Caldwell still directly overseeing. Forward original to D.C. Biotechnical Division. Sarah read on, finding multiple reports from June and September 1948, all bearing Caldwell's name. They referenced exchanging research results with U.S. military laboratories, including reports on experiments conducted on prisoners in Europe. Another passage, dated October 3, 1948, noted received data from the Voss Group Dachau. Documents confirm value in field conditions. Microfilm copies sent to Washington. All local records eliminated. Attached was a list of communication routes: Luxembourg, Brussels, Zurich. The coordinator, Caldwell. Sarah was stunned to find another detail at the end of the file. Recipient Office of Scientific Intelligence, Washington, D.C. A handwritten note confirmed Caldwell reported directly to the U.S. bypassing standard military channels. This meant the entire operation was within high-level intelligence, not a rogue initiative. In another appendix, Sarah read, risk of exposure, one U.S. medical officer neutralized, Ardennes, 1944. Current risk evidence may exist with Luxembourg resistance. Recommend continued sweeps. This line directly referenced Donovan. The CIA not only knew of his disappearance, but documented it internally as a controlled event. Sarah pieced it all together. Donovan was captured on December 21, 1944. By 1948, Caldwell was still active, signing reports about evacuating German doctors and exchanging medical research. The data he transported from the Ardennes was legitimized into an intelligence program called Medical Network, reported directly to Washington. This proved Donovan wasn't mistaken. When he wrote in his notebook, "They protect Germans, not our own soldiers," it wasn't just a battlefield sentiment. It reflected a policy sustained for years afterward, led by Caldwell. The FOIA documents ended with a classified report dated December 20, 1948, signed by Caldwell, stating Medical Network progressing. The greatest risk comes not from the enemy across, but from those who once served in the medical unit. Recommend continued monitoring and intervention if necessary. This echoed the exact words Donovan had written and sent to the Luxembourg nurse. The enemy beside you is more dangerous than the one in front. Sarah now had official confirmation. Caldwell Raven wasn't just a shadow in the Ardennes, he was the central figure in a real intelligence program, protected by the CIA, and Donovan's disappearance was part of a long-term cover-up strategy. The FOIA documents Sarah held not only proved Donovan was neutralized on Caldwell's orders, but also revealed the existence of a much larger system, a covert intelligence network trading in medical and biological research data, originating in the Ardennes. In a 1948 CIA report, alongside Caldwell's signature, an appendix listed liaison partners. This list didn't match legitimate medical channels. Instead, it included addresses in Switzerland, Austria, and post-surrender Germany. The final note read, "Intermediary channel, Raven approved." When Sarah cross-referenced, she saw a pattern. In 1944, 1945, Caldwell directly oversaw the evacuation of German doctors like Voss from the Ardennes, through Luxembourg and Brussels. They weren't prosecuted as war criminals, but were taken to secret facilities in Europe to continue their work. From 1946, research results were packaged by Raven, transferred through intermediaries in Zurich and Stockholm. The first buyer the U.S. military. But a May 1947 document revealed a turning point. Contact established with Eastern European channels. Some data shared to maintain balance. Raven reports directly maintained dual leverage. This meant Caldwell turned Nazi medical data into a commodity. He sold it to Washington to bolster U.S. biological research, while controlled leaks to the Soviets maintained political influence and benefits. Another report, from October 1948, confirmed negotiations successful. Soviet side agreed to payment via Bern channel. Raven confirmed security. Sarah paused here, recalling Caldwell's Stockholm bank account, active until 2000. Clearly the funds sustained for decades came from trading biological data, a black market Raven controlled. The file included a memo among CIA officers discussing the Donovan risk. It read, a U.S. medical officer witnessed the initial phase Ardennes. He objected and compiled a list of abandoned wounded. Raven confirmed this personnel was handled. Risk: if the diary or report leaks, the entire medical network will collapse. Sarah realized Donovan wasn't just a missing doctor, he was the only witness to the initial exchange. American wounded abandoned to protect assets, the German doctors. He dared to write a report, dared to protest, and thus became Raven's greatest threat. Cross-referencing the diary, everything aligned. Donovan wrote, "They protect Germans, not our own soldiers." Later CIA documents confirmed exactly that. Caldwell viewed Germans as assets, while American wounded were burdens to eliminate. Sarah continued reviewing the FOIA files. In a late 1949 report, Raven was described as the chief coordinator of medical network. From then on, the term Raven Network emerged. No longer just a personal code name, Raven became the name of an entire system. The files showed this network operated at least until the early 1960s, then rebranded and dispersed. But the core principle remained. Medical data, biological research, and protected German doctors became commodities, traded for money, power, and influence. Donovan was the first victim of that network, the one erased to pave the way for a decades-long trade in war crimes. Sarah condensed the documents, seeing the case's full structure. Donovan didn't die from German fire. He was eliminated by Raven to protect a transnational medical black market, where Caldwell, its leader, sold to both Washington and Moscow. With this evidence, the 1944 disappearance became an international accusation. The U.S. military sacrificed its own wounded to protect German medical criminals, then turned their data into a Cold War commodity. And the key to unlocking this truth was singular: Donovan's bloodstained diary, the only witness to the moment the Raven Network began. After piecing together intelligence files and confirming the Raven Network was a covert trade in medical and biological data, Sarah realized one source remained untapped: her own family. Sarah's mother, Margaret Donovan Jr., now in her 70s, was Michael Donovan's only daughter, born months after he was reported missing in the Ardennes. Sarah returned to Indianapolis, sitting across from her mother in a softly lit living room. When Sarah presented all the evidence, the bloodstained diary, declassified CIA files, and Caldwell's name, her mother sat in silence for a long time. Then she opened an old drawer, pulling out a yellowed envelope tied with thin twine. "It's time you knew," she said. "In 1952, when I was 8, my mother, your grandmother, received an anonymous letter. No return address, just typewritten on thin paper, a short line, 'Your father died for telling the truth.' Below it was a small symbol, a faint black raven, like a stamp." Sarah opened the envelope, finding the yellowed paper, typed letters neat and precise. As her mother described, it was a single brief sentence, undated, unsigned. In the bottom right corner, a rough but clear black stamp of a raven with spread wings. "Your grandmother was terrified," Sarah's mother continued. "She hid the letter, too scared to show anyone, afraid of being watched, accused. But before she passed, she gave it to me and said, 'Keep this. One day someone in the family will need to know.' I stayed silent my whole life, keeping it in this drawer." Sarah photographed the letter, carefully comparing the raven stamp to the emblem witnesses had described. The shapes were nearly identical: widespread wings, head tilted left, rough lines, an unofficial symbol used only in code names. Her mother went on, "As a child, I sometimes saw strangers standing outside, watching the house, never speaking. Your grandmother called them watchers. I didn't understand then, but now I'm sure they were ensuring the Donovan family stayed quiet." Sarah asked, "Did you ever think Dad wasn't lost to the Germans?" Her mother shook her head. "Deep down, I always felt the MIA record was a cover, but in those days, the Cold War, speaking out was suicide. The 1952 letter only confirmed he didn't die from bullets, but for defying something untouchable." Sarah placed the letter beside Donovan's diary. Words from 2 different times, a hurried scrawl in the snow, and an anonymous message 7 years later, pointed to the same truth. Donovan was eliminated for trying to expose the Raven network. Margaret also handed over a small wooden box. Inside was Donovan's medical corps badge, and another note, in her grandmother's shaky handwriting, "If anyone asks about the Raven symbol, show them this letter." With her mother's account, Sarah had proof the Donovan family wasn't clueless. As early as the 1950s, shadowy figures had tried to intimidate, even threaten, them into silence. The Raven stamp on the letter was the mark of Raven, the network Caldwell ran. The conversation ended in heavy silence. Sarah's mother said slowly, "Your father died because he wouldn't look away, but those of us who survived, including me, lived in fear our whole lives. Now that you've taken this path, know that Raven never vanished. They just hide in the shadows." Sarah gathered the anonymous letter, the wooden box, and all the family evidence. Her mother's final piece fit perfectly with the intelligence files and bloodstained diary. Donovan didn't fall to German fire, but was eliminated by Raven, and even after the war, the shadow of Caldwell's network loomed over his family, forcing their silence for decades. After leaving Indianapolis, with the 1952 anonymous letter, bearing the Raven stamp, Sarah knew the investigation had entered a point of no return. The bloodstained diary, declassified CIA files, family evidence, all formed a chain of proof, pointing directly to the Raven network. But she also knew those targeted wouldn't sit idly by. 3 days later, in Washington, D.C., as Sarah prepared to meet an archivist to discuss releasing the files, a black car stopped outside the coffee shop where she was waiting. 2 men in suits stepped in, flashing badges. "Central Intelligence Agency, Miss Donovan?" one asked bluntly. "We need to talk." They invited Sarah to their car. The air was tense on the drive. The car stopped at an unmarked administrative building in the suburbs. She was led to a small meeting room. Door closed. On the table sat a thick file. The older man, introducing himself as Special Agent Carver, opened the file. "We know you're pursuing the Michael Donovan case, but you should understand, that matter was settled long ago, and Donovan wasn't the hero you think." Carver flipped to a few pages, sliding them toward Sarah. They were blurry copies, claiming Donovan had suspicious contact with Germans, and expressed intent to desert. One short report, dated 1945, stamped top secret, concluded, "Lieutenant Michael Donovan, suspected collaboration with enemy." Sarah examined them closely. The typeface was odd, not matching the documents she'd seen. The ink stamp was also different. She said coldly, "These are forged. I have Donovan's original diary, and 1948 CIA documents confirm he was neutralized for opposing Caldwell. What are you trying to do with these papers? Smear a victim?" Carver didn't flinch. He leaned back, voice steady. You can believe what you want, but if you go public with your files, we have the means to release these. The public will see Donovan as a traitor, not a victim. Your family's honor will be ruined. You'll lose all credibility." The other man interjected, "We advise you to stop your investigation, drop everything. If not, papers like these will flood the press, and don't forget, the CIA has the power to make any journalist disappear from the media." Sarah kept her voice calm. "If Donovan was truly a traitor, why did you need to create a Raven network, erase Caldwell's records, and fabricate a medical network operation? If Donovan was wrong, he'd have faced a court-martial in 1944. Instead, he was made to disappear." Carver stayed silent, tapping his finger lightly on the table. Finally, he said, "Caldwell is part of a history you shouldn't touch. We won't debate right or wrong. I'm just making it clear. Stop, and you'll be safe. Continue, and you'll destroy yourself." The meeting ended quickly. Sarah was driven back to the city. She knew this wasn't just a warning, it was an ultimatum. The CIA was ready to fabricate documents, even tarnish Donovan's honor, to protect Raven's secrets. That night, Sarah met Walker at a rented apartment. She recounted everything. Walker went quiet, then said, "I expected they'd play that card. They want to paint your father as a traitor, to discredit everything you found. But we have the original diary, evidence from independent witnesses. Don't let them intimidate you." Sarah nodded. She knew every step forward would be more dangerous, but the CIA's need to confront her with forged documents was a sign the truth she held was too significant, threatening a network once protected by the government. Determined not to back down, Sarah planned her next move: compile all evidence, the diary, declassified CIA files, anonymous letter, living witnesses, into a complete investigative dossier, ready for international release. But she also knew, from this moment, Raven and Caldwell's successors wouldn't stop at threats. They'd try to erase both the truth and its keeper, just as they did to Michael Donovan over 70 years ago. After the CIA's ultimatum, Sarah understood what she held wasn't just about a wartime disappearance. It touched current interests, corporations, and individuals still thriving off Raven's secrets. While reviewing medical archives from Brussels and comparing them to papers found in Donovan's medical kit, Sarah noticed a recurring code, PHR-12. At first it seemed like a transport code, but cross-referencing with the 1948 CIA documents, PHR stood for Pharos Laboratories, a private pharmaceutical company founded in 1946 in Zurich. Walker, a U.S. veteran who helped her escape to Sweden, used old communication channels to track down the company's records. Within a day, he handed Sarah a current business report. Pharos Laboratories had merged with several companies throughout the 1970s, ultimately becoming Pharos International Pharmaceuticals, headquartered in New York. Annual revenue in the tens of billions, with globally listed stocks. Sarah opened the list of the current board of directors. The name at the top, Evelyn Caldwell Hartman, Chief Executive Officer. She was the granddaughter of Colonel Thomas Caldwell, Raven. This detail pierced through the entire network like a dagger. The head of Raven during World War II had vanished without a trace after 1946, but his legacy lived on in the form of a massive pharmaceutical conglomerate. Sarah decided to try a new approach, searching Pharos's scientific publications. In a 1952 article, she found preclinical data on human cold tolerance, cited from unpublished wartime research sources. Cross-referencing with Donovan's journal, it was the exact type of research Donovan had witnessed Caldwell directing, experiments on wounded soldiers left in the snow. Another 1961 article noted altitude pressure respiration data that nearly matched reports from experiments at Dachau, seized by the Allies. But instead of citing origins, Pharos labeled it internal database. Sarah printed dozens of pages, marking relevant sections. The evidence grew clearer. Pharos had absorbed all data from the Raven network and turned it into the foundation for medical products, from cardiovascular drugs and antibiotics to vaccines. These products were still in circulation, used by millions worldwide. Walker read the file and growled, "Caldwell's granddaughter is building an empire on the blood of the very soldiers Donovan tried to save." Sarah contacted an old colleague who had worked in the international pharmaceutical industry. After several exchanges, she received a confidential report. The FDA had suspected Pharos in the late 1990s for lack of transparency about preclinical data. However, the case was quickly closed, with no reason disclosed. A breakthrough came when Sarah accessed a drug trademark database. She discovered a leading Pharaoh's respiratory drug with test data originating from wartime survival studies, dated 1944. This meant that 70 years later, the inhumane experiments Donovan had witnessed were still embedded in modern medicine. Sarah arranged a meeting with a retired Pharaoh's scientist at a quiet Stockholm bar. When she asked questions, he stayed silent for a long time before admitting, "We all knew the original data wasn't clean, but it was used continuously in internal reports. No one dared ask because too much money depended on it." He handed Sarah a USB containing several 2005 internal emails from when Evelyn Caldwell Hartman became CEO. One email, signed by Evelyn, stated clearly, "We hold the rights to the wartime data. That's an advantage no competitor has." Sarah now had proof that Caldwell Raven didn't disappear, but built a financial and medical network to legitimize illicit data. Pharaoh's Pharmaceuticals, now run by Caldwell's granddaughter, continued to profit. The research Donovan tried to stop was still generating massive profits. As Sarah prepared to leave the bar, two unfamiliar men walked in. The retired scientist whispered, "They'll never let you bring this to light. Be careful." Then he left immediately. Sarah and Walker knew their trail had been detected. That night, they checked their rented apartment. The lock showed signs of tampering. Documents in the suitcase were rummaged through, but the USB was still there. Someone clearly wanted Sarah to know they could reach her any time. Sarah messaged a trusted colleague in New York, "If I disappear, Pharaoh's Pharmaceuticals, check the Caldwell lineage." The encrypted message was sent as a final safety measure. What Donovan saw in the Ardennes snow in 1944 led straight to a 21st century multinational corporation. From the trace of a bloodstained medical kit, Sarah uncovered the truth: the Raven network was never dismantled. It merely changed clothes, donning the legal mask of the pharmaceutical industry. And now its leader was the direct descendant of the man who ordered Donovan's removal 70 years ago. After confirming evidence about Pharaoh's Pharmaceuticals and the Caldwell heirs' role, Sarah decided to return to Luxembourg to trace the final wartime links. At a nursing home near Esch-sur-Alzette, she learned of a witness who had stayed silent for over half a century. Jean-Marie Hoffner, 94, once a construction foreman in the Ardennes in late 1944. Walker arranged the meeting. Jean-Marie, in a wheelchair, frail with age but with sharp eyes, spoke in a hoarse voice. When Sarah mentioned Donovan's name, he hesitated, then nodded. "I know that name, and I know why that medical kit was in the bunker." Sarah placed a recorder on the table. Jean-Marie spoke slowly, but clearly. On December 27, 1944, a group of American officers came to his village, demanding locals help clear an old bunker. Among them, Colonel Thomas Caldwell stood out, tall in a heavy coat, with a black Raven insignia on his collar. "We were ordered to dig, then rebury. No one was allowed to ask why. When I opened the bunker, a medical kit was already there. I saw bloodstains, and the name tag Lieutenant Michael J. Donovan. I asked, 'Who does this belong to?' Caldwell looked at me, handed me an envelope, and said, 'Bury it and forget it.' Jean-Marie confessed he complied. The envelope contained a large sum, more than a year's income for a village foreman. In return, he had to stay silent. Anyone who spoke would be executed for betraying the Allies. Sarah asked, "Do you still have anything from that day?" Jean-Marie signaled for a nurse to bring an old wooden box. Inside was a decayed parchment, once moldy, but still recognizable as part of a map. It marked tunnel routes in the forest south of Wiltz, the exact spot where, in 2014, workers found Donovan's medical kit. "Caldwell gave me this map, saying if anyone asked later, just lead them to the right place. They'd know what to do. I never fully understood its meaning, until I saw the news a few years ago. They found the kit. I knew the truth would come out eventually." Sarah compared the map to photos of the discovery site. The markers matched perfectly, proving Jean-Marie's confession couldn't be fabricated. He continued, voice trembling, "Caldwell didn't just pay me. He promised to protect the village from German shelling. And truly, after that, the Germans never attacked our area again. I believe Caldwell traded something, not just my silence, but the entire region. The price was the truth about Donovan." Walker interjected, "Did you hear Donovan's name mentioned that day?" Jean-Marie nodded. A younger officer told Caldwell the American had seen too much. Caldwell replied, "Then make him disappear. I heard it clearly. They didn't hide it, thinking we wouldn't dare speak." Sarah asked one final question. Why speak now? Jean-Marie looked her in the eye. I stayed silent for 70 years, carrying the guilt of burying the truth. But I don't want to die with that burden. If your father died protecting wounded soldiers, I must at least leave these words so the world knows. He signed Sarah's prepared statement. The bunker map, detailed testimony, and an old envelope still containing one bill, became direct evidence that Caldwell staged the scene, marking Donovan as missing in action. As Sarah left the nursing home, Walker looked at her. We just got the final piece. A living witness, money, a map. It all ties Caldwell. Sarah understood. With Jean-Marie's confession, the chain of evidence was complete. Caldwell not only orchestrated the disappearance, but actively bribed, manipulated, and buried the scene. Raven was no longer a vague name in files. It took shape in blood, money, and forced silence. After leaving the Luxembourg nursing home, Sarah and Walker immediately sent Jean-Marie Hoffner's testimony, the bunker map, and the 1944 payment from Caldwell to a group of investigative journalists in Brussels. For the first time, physical evidence, a living witness, and archival records formed a complete logical chain. On May 12, 2015, Belgium's Le Soir published a front-page story. Ardennes Secret. Was Lieutenant Medic Donovan eliminated by his own allies? The article cited Jean-Marie's confession, images of the Red Cross medical kit, and details of Caldwell's Raven insignia. The news spread rapidly, picked up by major papers in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and then the UK and US. Within a week, the European Parliament demanded a joint investigation. The US initially stayed silent, then the Department of Defense issued a vague statement, "We are reviewing new information." But when the media published more evidence from Sarah, the bunker map marked by Caldwell and a Swiss bank account, in his name active until 2009, the pressure became unstoppable. In Washington, the Senate formed an emergency subcommittee on the Raven network. Several former CIA and War Department officials were summoned. During hearings, some admitted Colonel Thomas Caldwell was tasked with coordinating a medical network in the final stages of World War II, and Donovan was an unwanted witness. The most shocking revelation came when a declassified 1951 personnel file surfaced, listing Caldwell as deceased accidental plane crash in Panama. Yet photos from Paraguay's archives showed a man under the alias Eduardo Calderón, living in Asunción, from 1953 to at least 1972. Facial recognition experts concluded a 95% match with Caldwell. This meant Caldwell faked his death to flee to South America, like many Nazi officers sheltered by the US and Europe. The news rocked the US public. Many outlets called it America's version of the rat line, escape routes for war criminals. Under pressure, the Justice Department reopened a posthumous case, and some retired intelligence figures were charged with treason for concealing, destroying evidence, and protecting Caldwell. In a preliminary New York trial, 2 former CIA officers admitted to directly manipulating Donovan's records. They said Donovan couldn't be allowed to survive because he threatened to expose the abandonment of wounded soldiers to protect German doctors secretly evacuated by the US. Their testimony matched Donovan's journal. They protected the Germans, not American soldiers. International reporters swarmed the trials. Sarah was called as a witness, bringing the blood-stained medical kit and torn medical notes. As she placed the kit on the stand before cameras, the courtroom fell silent. "This isn't just a soldier's item," Sarah said, "but proof of a network that betrayed those they swore to protect." In a joint European-US investigation report, the Raven Network was officially named for the first time. The conclusion stated, Raven was a parallel intelligence structure, operating from 1944, specializing in collecting, trading, and exploiting biomedical data from Nazi experiments and wartime trials. Donovan was the only dangerous witness eliminated. The news of Caldwell's fake death fueled further outrage. Paraguayan TV rebroadcast a 1970 report showing Eduardo Calderón cutting a ribbon at a hospital opening. Close inspection confirmed it was Caldwell, gray-haired but unmistakable in gait and voice. The man who ordered an American doctor's disappearance now stood openly among South America's philanthropists. In the U.S., protests erupted outside Pharos Pharmaceuticals' New York headquarters. Demonstrators held up Donovan's photos and signs, "Restore honor to the medic soldier." The pressure forced the company to disclose wartime research data sources. Here, another truth emerged. Dozens of Ferris's foundational drugs directly relied on data from Caldwell and the Raven network. The European Investigation Committee demanded the recall of some products and launched legal accountability proceedings against Ferris's current leadership. Evelyn Caldwell Hartman, Caldwell's granddaughter, testified before Congress. When asked if she knew Nazi and Donovan-related data were used in products, she replied, "We only inherited the scientific legacy. I'm not responsible for my ancestors' actions." The defense sparked immediate backlash. At its peak, the federal prosecutor's office charged Evelyn and several board members with continuing to exploit data from war crimes, concealing origins, and deceiving regulators. The case became one of the biggest scandals in pharmaceutical history. Sarah followed the developments through news reports. She knew the fight wasn't over, but at least the truth Donovan died to protect was now public. 70 years later, from a blood-stained medical kit, the truth reached international courts, forcing Raven's heirs to face justice. Caldwell, Raven, who vanished from records in 1946, now stood exposed. He didn't die in an accident, but lived comfortably in South America for 3 decades under a false identity, while Donovan remained MIA. The contrast sparked a painful question in the American public: who was the real hero and who was the real traitor? When the first verdict was delivered against a former intelligence officer in New York, the public understood the answer was clear. Donovan was killed to bury the truth, but 70 years later, that truth surfaced and brought the entire Raven network to light. In November 2016, the U.S. Department of Defense issued a special statement. Lieutenant Michael J. Donovan, battlefield medic, was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, a decoration he should have received in 1944. The citation read, "For steadfastly protecting wounded soldiers and attempting to report battlefield ethical violations, even at the cost of his life." On November 11, Veterans Day, a solemn ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. 3 honor seats for Donovan's family were placed in the front row. Sarah sat beside her mother, Donovan's only daughter, now in her 70s, her eyes wet but proud. Behind them, dozens of ardent veterans and their descendants attended, many carrying Red Cross flags to honor the legacy of a battlefield medic, erased from history for too long. A flag-draped coffin, containing remains recovered from the Luxembourg bunker, was brought to Arlington with full honors, an honor guard military band, and the sound of taps. The ceremony's commander read the medal citation. Donovan's mother stood to accept the award on behalf of the family, her trembling hands clutching the ribbon. The veterans present saluted in unison. Many shed tears, understanding a bitter truth: it took 70 years for a medic to be restored his honor. The ceremony was broadcast live across the U.S. Sarah reading Donovan's final words appeared on the New York Times front page, "The enemy beside us." Millions watched, many posting online, "Donovan didn't vanish, he became a witness." But the story didn't end at Arlington. That same week, international media revealed hundreds of Raven network files remained classified. Some CIA and War Department reports were still withheld for national security. Many journalists noted Raven never fully disappeared, it just changed form. Experts pointed out that Caldwell not only faked his death and lived in South America, but left a complex financial network, reaching into pharmaceutical, medical and even defense research institutes. Some commercial records suggested Ferris's investments were still protected by current political figures. In a CNN panel, a retired intelligence officer said bluntly, "Awarding Donovan's medal was necessary. But justice isn't done. Raven's shadow lingers in many institutions we use daily." In the days following the ceremony, many ardent veterans wrote to Donovan's family, sharing rumors they'd heard of a medic taken away in the blizzard, but never dared confirm. Now they felt a burden lifted. At Johns Hopkins Medical School, a special symposium titled Ethics After Donovan was held. Professors stressed that wartime ethics lessons must start by remembering sacrifices like Donovan's, who dared oppose orders to abandon wounded soldiers. At Arlington, Donovan's gravestone bore an inscription requested by the family: "He saved lives." They erased him. Now he is remembered. The stone became a destination for students, veterans, and international visitors. Flowers and small cloth medical kits were left year-round. Yet new reports kept leaking. Evidence suggested Raven continued operating through the Cold War, selling biomedical data to the Soviets and later to multinational corporations. Journalists called it a dark legacy. the ceremony couldn't erase. Sarah closed her investigation with a long article in The Atlantic, titled, "The Enemy Beside Us, Legacy of Lieutenant Michael Donovan." It was both a tribute and a warning: traitors aren't always on the other side of the battle line. Sometimes, they're right beside you, in the same uniform. That conclusion became Donovan's legacy, not just for his family, but for America. A reminder that justice can be delayed, but not buried forever. A blood-stained medical kit, sealed in a Luxembourg bunker for 7 decades, finally unlocked a truth generations paid to keep silent. Donovan's story closed at Arlington's gravestone, but Raven's didn't. In the shadows, that network's traces lingered. In Donovan's story, the most haunting aspect isn't the thrilling conspiracies, but the mundane actions that hid the truth. A medical kit buried at exact coordinates, kept by a Luxembourg foreman. Medical Network, European Theater, 1948. Reports signed by Caldwell, internal Ferris emails run by Caldwell's granddaughter, and the dirty tactic of fake documents the CIA threatened to release to redefine a person. In America today, the practical lesson is patriotism doesn't mean silence. Loyalty to the Constitution, professional ethics and patient citizens outweighs loyalty to any individual or organization. If you see something wrong at work, whether in healthcare, tech, finance, or public service, follow Sarah's example, document concurrently, preserve a chain of evidence, cross-reference multiple sources, use legal channels like FOIA whistleblower protections, and prepare for counter-narratives. As citizens consumers, demand transparency in healthcare and pharmaceutical data sources, support laws mandating research origin disclosure, and ask companies, where did this evidence come from? As managers, scientists, build ethical guardrails, independent committees, regular data origin audits, mechanisms to protect whistleblowers. Don't let a murky legacy enter today's products. As a community, honor the right people, like Arlington's ceremony restoring Donovan's dignity, but keep monitoring, because networks like Raven only change shape, rarely vanish. And remember Donovan's words, not the enemy across but beside us, meaning check yourself, your teammates, your processes, to make integrity the first and last defense of society. Thank you for following the journey to uncover the truth about Lieutenant Donovan and the Raven Network, after over 70 years of being buried. Subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more historical secrets, and we'll see you in the next video.